Hello everyone, what's going on? I'm Gav, the Masterline74, back again today, and welcome to a Valve source code tutorial follow-up video. And what I'm going to be following up on today is episode 0, which is downloading and compiling the Source 2013 single player or multiplayer code from Valve. Now at this point there's 3 or 4 different versions of this guide. So there's the first version of the guide that I did way back in 2020. There's an updated guide in 2023, there's a version about how to do it on Linux, and a more recent version which covered the 64-bit Team Fortress 2 Source 2013 multiplayer update. Now, what I'm going to do is cover some updates to those guides and correct some information that I would have said, and also extend on some things that I pretty much wouldn't really have to talk about in any other video, but I feel like this is the appropriate place to do it, if that makes sense. I know it doesn't, but anyway. So the first thing I'm going to cover is thanks to Franco Simonazzi 1959, I hope I'm not butchering that name, but it covers how to download the Source 2013 single player code from Valve's GitHub page, following on from the Team Fortress 2 update. Now, there's a couple ways you can go about doing this. You can go to Valve's GitHub page, and where it says master, if you click on that, that's the branch, and it should have a drop-down menu of other branches that the repository has. And so you should see single player. If you click on that, it takes you to the single player branch of the Source 2013 code, and then you can just click on the green code button, select download zip, and then it will download the single player code. Now, if you're using something like Linux and using the git command, then you can do something like this instead. So you need to go to your command line interface, terminal, console, command prompt, whatever you want to call it, and you want to type in git clone -b single player -- single-branch https://github.com/valve software /source-SDK-2013. Now, the single branch argument that I mentioned only works with versions of Git that are greater than 1.7.10, but what that does is it essentially finds the single player branch and only downloads that specific branch from the repository that is provided. So that is basically the same as downloading and extracting the single player code from Valve's GitHub page. Now, I know I'm talking a lot about Valve's code that they officially provide, but there's also plenty of community repositories that exist, the most popular undoubtedly being Mapbase, which includes a lot of bug fixes, improvements, and additional features, but there's other repositories like the 2013 Community Edition code that I believe I used for the VGUI screens tutorial. I'll leave a card to that right now so you can check that out if you want to. But that version also includes some bug fixes and optional enhancements, and there's even a version from OzXbox Source SDK Resources that takes the 2013 code from Valve, but makes it work with Visual Studio 2022 by default. And I also believe that Mapbase and the 2013 Community Edition versions of the code also have Visual Studio 2022 support. And if you want to, there's even my GitHub page, where I infrequently add code that I show off in the Valve source code tutorial videos, and once I'm done with all of these follow-ups that I plan on doing, there is going to be an update coming soon, trademark. Now, one of the things I did mention in the 2023 version of episode 0 was about using Visual Studio 2013. I said that you could use that version if you wanted to, but the thing is, it will end up failing, and I do mention it in that video. Basically, you'd need to use another version of Visual Studio at some point, like Visual Studio 2022, because Visual Studio 2013 will cease to work. The only reason I advised to download Visual Studio 2013 in the first place was to get the correct platform toolset that the Source 2013 single player especially needs in order to compile correctly. Now, I know that there is a comment by Sinar Bayrumik, I'm probably butchering that name as well, but they said something about using the 2013 build tools and seeing if that works. Well, I can confirm they are not the same thing as the platform toolset, so at this point there's not going to be any updates to episode 0 in that regard. Visual Studio 2013 is still a necessary step. Which leads me onto a comment by Guest Sneeze Plays, who wanted to know if there's going to be a 2024 version or 2025 version at this point of episode 0. Now the thing is, I don't see this as being particularly necessary because I couldn't get some of the aforementioned community repositories working with just Visual Studio 2022 installed on my system, which means Visual Studio 2013 wasn't used, and because it wasn't used, there was compilation errors with the code. So because of that, I can't really do a tutorial where I outline all of the steps and at the end say, well, you have a coin flip chance odds as to whether or not the code compiles. If it does, then good job. If not, then you're screwed. That's not going to be a very good tutorial now, is it? So in that regard, unless there's some update to the Source 2013 single player code, like adding the portal code and adding 64-bit support, I don't think I'm going to be updating episode 0 in that regard anytime soon. Now, in regards to the 64-bit multiplayer code, which was the Team Fortress 2 edition, I did highlight the fact that you may not really need to get Python, but that information wasn't really available at that point in time when I did that video. I said you really don't need to worry about it. However, it is actually required. Valve updated the GitHub page to say that Python was required, so make sure you actually get Python if you're dealing with the 64-bit multiplayer version of the Source 2013 code. Now I'm going to move on to some miscellaneous things I figured out in the meantime that I'm just going to shove into this video because reasons. And one of these additions is about VPC and in particular the platforms argument. Basically, if you use something like VPC and then use /platforms, you can actually get information about the projects that you can build. So for example, if you can build the Win32 or Win64 versions, Linux 32, Linux 64, OS X 32 and OS X 64, and there's also X360 and PS3 in there as well, at least for the single player code. Now, one thing to keep in mind is that you will have issues if you try to build or compile the 64-bit versions of the Source 2013 single player code, or the 32-bit versions of the new Source 2013 multiplayer code. So as a bit of a practical example, you can use something like vpc.exe /HL2 /episodic /Linux32 plus game /MKSLN for make solution of games.mac. And if you do that on Windows, what that will do is it will create the 32-bit Linux version of the games solution or games make project of the Source 2013 single player code. Or if you want the new Source 2013 multiplayer code to have a games solution on Windows, then you would just do something like vpc.exe /HL2MP /TF /define : and then in all capitals source SDK plus game /MKSLN games.sln, and that will basically create the games solution in Source 2013 multiplayer. That is using the 64-bit Team Fortress 2 extension, if you will. And so I'm going to end this video by talking about some of the compilation for other platforms on Windows. So for example, I need to give a thank you to Utopic Tahu for bringing this up, which was saying something to the effect of, can you compile the Linux version of the Source 2013 code on Windows without needing to use a Linux virtual machine? Now that would be very helpful. However, I didn't really find any good ways to do this. The best thing that I found was to use something called Cygwin, which is an application that essentially allows you to use a Linux terminal or Linux command line interface that can actually access your Windows file system and utilize Linux commands within that Windows file system. Now, after doing all the setup, getting all the packages and stuff that I need, and running the make command like you would on Linux, it looks like it starts to compile the code, but then you get a whole bunch of errors. The code fails to compile, and it seems that it's a 100% failure rate. I don't know how to solve it, and if anyone out there has any ideas of stuff that could help in that regard, then it would be much appreciated. And I did mention earlier about the Xbox 360 and PS3 platforms, at least for the Source 2013 single player code only. that doesn't really seem to work because you undoubtedly going to need some sort of SDK, development kit, or files to make those projects compile, and I don't know if you need a specialized extension or if a Visual Studio solution would work, but if anyone watching has any idea of how to create the code for those platforms, it would be interesting to at least cover at some point, like how to make your own Xbox 360 mod or something. And so the last thing I'm going to talk about is what I said at the end of the 2023 version of episode 0, which I basically said something like, could this video get on par performance-wise with the original video that I did back in 2020? Now, it goes without saying, at least looking at initial statistics, that the 2023 version has more views, more likes, or / engagements and comments. So as of the date of this recording session, the 14th of July, at around 9:30 in the evening, I can confirm that the 2020 version of episode 0 has 6,058 views, 88 likes to 3 dislikes and 41 comments, but the 2023 version of the guide has 24,380 views, 382 likes to 3 dislikes and 132 comments. So it goes without saying, people will probably go back to those videos and dislike them now that I brought this information up, but all engagement is good engagement, right? And with that, I'm going to be ending this video. I don't have anything else to add or follow up on in any of the guides that I've talked about. If there is anything that I missed, then feel free to let me know in the comments section down below. And if there's any other improvements or suggestions that you can think of, then please let me know. And have a great day, peace out, see you later. So I hope you'll check out the follow-up videos that I have planned, check out the GitHub, check out the other tutorials. Yeah, I might as well just end the video now, I don't really have anything else to say. Take care, guys.